We all have products that we just can't buy the generic version of. Whether it's the equipment for your favorite hobby or the tool you need for a job to get it done just right. For me, it's my favorite drink in the world, Dr. Pepper. There are a bunch of generic versions on the market, and they all say the same thing. We're just like Dr. Pepper. Well, they're not. To me, there is nothing like the taste of an actual name brand Dr. Pepper. This brings me to the passage I want to look at today. It comes from the book of Colossians, chapter 2, verses 8, 9, and 10. Paul begins in verse 8. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depend on human tradition and the basic principles of the world, rather than on Christ. Paul here is talking about something that's always existed and always will exist, and that is philosophies and worldviews that oppose the gospel of Christ. In Paul's day, it was philosophies like Epicureanism and Stoicism and other such philosophies that spring up from thinkers like Plato and Aristotle. And today, it's a multitude of things, but they all come back to the basic idea of you have your truth, I have my truth. As long as you know yourself, it will all be okay for you in the end. Paul would strongly disagree with this. But he goes on in verse 9 when he says, For in Christ all the fullness of deity lives in bodily form. If you were to read these verses back to back, you would notice the contrast between the hollow and empty philosophies of the world and the fullness that is found in Christ. But Paul continues in verse 10. He says, And you have been given fullness in Christ, who is the head over every power and authority. So, not only are there generic philosophies of which Christ is fullness, but you are called to that fullness. Isn't that amazing? The idea that not only does this exist, this fullness that is in Christ, but you're called to it. Now, when you read not just these verses, but the book of Colossians in general, it's important to remember that Paul is writing this to a young church. And he's writing this to encourage them to keep up the good work in Christ that they were doing, and to not be deceived by the various philosophies that existed in their day as well as ours. And they, as I said before, always have existed and always will. From Greek theater to Hollywood, there's always going to be media trying to pull you in different directions. From the different worldviews and philosophies that we've already touched upon to modern day politics, there's always going to be thinkers and politicians that will tell you, my way is best. Vote for me. Subscribe to my way of thinking, and only then will you be fulfilled. Well, to Paul, the only fullness you will find is in Christ. So, how do you live in Christ? Paul answers this in chapter 3, starting in verse 12. He says, Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive what grievances you may have against another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you, and over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. There are several things that jump out at me in that particular passage. First off, he starts off, therefore as God's chosen people. Again, touching on the fact that you're already called to this. And the second thing is the words he uses as far as clothe yourself. This is not something you merely do. It's something you're to be immersed in. You're to put love on as you put on your shirt every day. But he says you're supposed to clothe yourself in forgiveness, even when it's hard, not just when it's easy to forgive, but especially when it's hard. You're supposed to bear with each other, bear with each other's grievances, and above all, you are to live in love. Not a love that is rooted in yourself, but a love that is rooted in Christ, because you are called to live in Him as a new creation.